The late afternoon sun slanted through the elm trees that lined the quiet street of West Hartford, painting the sidewalks in soft gold. Lauren Hayes adjusted her dress for the third time in the hallway mirror, her heart beating a little too fast. Today mattered. This wasn't just another date or a casual dinner. This was the day she introduced Eric to the most important person in her life. If things went well, it would mark the beginning of something bigger, something permanent. "You look beautiful, honey," Margaret called from the kitchen, her voice warm as always. Lauren smiled nervously at her reflection, smoothing a stray strand of hair. "Thanks, Mom. He should be here any minute." When the doorbell rang, her stomach fluttered. Eric stood on the porch in a crisp button-down shirt and tailored trousers, every bit the composed, confident attorney she had fallen for. "Ready?" he asked with a soft smile, taking her hand. "More than ready," she breathed, leading him inside. The familiar scent of cinnamon and old books wrapped around them as they stepped into the living room. Margaret appeared, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her face lighting up at the sight of her daughter. "You must be Eric," she said warmly. Come in, come in." They settled at the kitchen table, a pot of chamomile tea steaming between them and a plate of Margaret's famous lemon cookies set in the center. Conversation started easily. Margaret asked about his work, and Eric spoke confidently about his career at a Hartford law firm, his focus on corporate litigation, and his plans to one day make partner. He spoke about the importance of building a stable family foundation, of managing resources wisely, of keeping everything under control to ensure a good life. Lauren listened with admiration, nodding along, filling in a detail here and there to make sure nothing fell flat. To her, he was everything she had hoped for, steady, intelligent, and dependable. Margaret listened quietly, smiling and nodding in all the right places, but Lauren caught the subtle shift in her mother's expression. The warmth in her eyes dimmed, replaced by a kind of distant attentiveness, as though she was searching for something beneath Eric's polished surface. Still, the afternoon flowed pleasantly. They laughed about Lauren's childhood quirks, shared stories about Hartford winters and small-town summer fairs. Margaret offered more cookies. Eric complimented her tea, and everything on the surface felt just as Lauren had imagined. After an hour, Eric glanced at his watch and stood. "We should get going. Dinner reservations," he said, kissing Lauren lightly on the cheek before turning to Margaret. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Mrs. Hayes." "The pleasure was mine," Margaret replied with a polite smile. "Drive safe." When the door clicked shut behind him, the house seemed to grow quieter. Lauren lingered in the hallway, replaying the afternoon in her mind, waiting for her mother to say how wonderful he was. Instead, Margaret stood by the window, gazing out at the softening light. "Well," Lauren prompted, trying to hide her eagerness. Margaret exhaled slowly, folding the dish towel in her hands. "He's impressive," she said carefully. "Polished. Successful." "But, Lauren," she turned to face her daughter, her expression tender but troubled. "There's something about him. Something cold. I can't quite explain it, but it's there. My heart feels uneasy." Lauren blinked, her chest tightening. "Cold? Mom, he's just serious. He's thoughtful. That's a good thing." "Maybe," Margaret conceded softly, "but a mother's intuition is rarely wrong. Please, sweetheart, don't rush. Think carefully before you make decisions you can't take back." The word stung more than Lauren expected. A lump rose in her throat, not of anger, but of disappointment. "I love him," she said quietly. "I know what I'm doing." "I know you believe that," Margaret said gently. "Just promise me you'll pay attention." Lauren turned away, her jaw set. "I don't need to be warned, Mom. Eric and I are fine. Tomorrow, we're going to his parents' place in the suburbs. It's time for me to meet them." Margaret hesitated, then nodded slowly, her eyes still clouded with worry. "All right. Just be careful, Lauren." Lauren forced a smile, but inside, frustration bubbled. Her mother didn't understand. Eric was everything she'd ever wanted, and tomorrow would prove it. As the sun dipped lower and the kitchen fell into a soft summer dusk, Margaret stood alone by the window, watching her daughter retreat to her room, her heart heavy with a quiet dread she couldn't name. The next morning broke clear and bright, the kind of summer day that seemed to hum with possibility. The sky stretched endlessly overhead, washed in a soft cornflower blue, and the air carried the faint scent of cut grass and warm asphalt. Lauren sat in the passenger seat of Eric's sleek black sedan, her hands folded in her lap, watching the familiar streets of Hartford give way to the quiet, winding roads of the Connecticut suburbs. Wildflowers nodded lazily along the roadside, and the golden fields beyond them rippled like silk in the breeze. She felt a flicker of excitement deep in her chest. Today was another milestone, meeting his parents, being welcomed into his world. "You'll like them," Eric said, glancing at her with a reassuring smile as the car purred down the highway. "They're traditional, but they're good people. They value order and hard work. That's what I was raised on." "I'm sure I will," Lauren replied, smiling back, though she couldn't help feeling a little nervous. "Just be yourself," he added, then paused as if reconsidering. "Well, maybe keep a few things in mind. My parents are particular about their home. They put a lot of care into it." "Like what?" she asked lightly. Eric's tone shifted subtly, becoming more precise. "For example, don't walk on the grass. They take a lot of pride in the lawn, and they hate when people step off the paths. And if you see fruit trees or plants, don't pick anything. They'll offer it to you if they want you to have it. It's just how they are." Lauren laughed softly. "That's fine. I wasn't planning on raiding the orchard." He didn't laugh with her. "I know it sounds a little strict," he said, "but they have their ways. Everything has its place. It's how they've always done things." She nodded, brushing off the faint unease that crept in. Wealthy people often had their quirks. It wasn't strange. In fact, there was something charming about people who cared so deeply about order and tradition. As they left the main road, the landscape grew quieter and more refined. Stately maples lined the lanes, their leaves shimmering in the sunlight. The air smelled faintly of honeysuckle and cedar mulch. Then, as the car turned onto a long private drive framed by wrought iron gates, Lauren felt her breath catch. The Whitman estate unfolded before them, like a page torn from a garden magazine. A sweeping lawn stretched out in perfect symmetry, not a blade of grass out of place. Flower beds bloomed in precise patterns, a riot of color contained within geometric borders. Even the gravel on the driveway looked deliberately raked into neat lines. At the center of it all stood a stately white colonial-style home, its black shutters crisp and immaculate, its front porch draped with ivy. "Wow," Lauren murmured. "It's beautiful." Eric's lips curved in a small, satisfied smile. "They like things just so." The car rolled to a stop near the circular drive, where a man and woman stood waiting. Robert Whitman, tall and broad-shouldered, even in his 60s, had a commanding presence that reminded Lauren of a judge stepping into a courtroom. Diane, in a pale linen dress and pearls, radiated warmth, or something that looked like warmth, as she waved them closer. "Lauren, welcome," Diane said brightly as they stepped out. "We've heard so much about you." "It's so nice to finally meet you both," Lauren replied, shaking her hand. Robert offered a firm handshake and a polite smile. "We're glad you're here. Eric's told us you're doing well with your design work." "I love it," she said. "It's rewarding in ways I never expected." "That's good," Robert replied simply. His eyes lingered on her for a beat longer than felt necessary before he turned toward the house. "Come on, let's show you around." They walked through the gardens, Diane pointing out her roses and the herb beds she tended herself. Everything was so pristine it felt almost unreal, like stepping into a world where nothing was out of place. Lauren found herself treading carefully, hyper-aware of her steps on the stone paths, remembering Eric's warning about the grass. As they neared a row of hydrangeas, the sound of footsteps approached from beyond the gate. A man in work boots and a sweat-stained t-shirt, a neighbor, perhaps, called out hesitantly, "Morning, Robert. Sorry to bother you. My car's tire went flat a mile down, and I was wondering if I could borrow your air pump to get it to the shop." Robert's posture stiffened. "You should have one of your own," he said evenly, his tone clipped. "We're having family time. You'll have to manage." The man shifted awkwardly, muttered an apology, and walked back down the drive. Diane didn't look up from her roses. Eric said nothing. Lauren stood frozen for a moment, an uncomfortable pang settling in her chest. The neighbor hadn't seemed entitled, just in need. But she quickly smothered the thought. This wasn't her family, not her place. "The roses are lovely," she murmured, forcing a smile. Diane glanced over her shoulder and smiled back as if nothing had happened. "Aren't they? I have a passion for keeping things in order. You'll see that's something we value here." Lauren nodded, though the word order now rang differently in her ears. They continued the tour, past the greenhouse, the stone fountain, the meticulously aligned vegetable beds. Everywhere she looked, symmetry and precision reigned. To anyone else, it might have seemed like paradise. To Lauren, it was beginning to feel like something else, a place where nothing dared to grow beyond its assigned space. As she stepped deeper into the manicured garden, the warm summer breeze stirred the hem of her dress. She inhaled deeply, willing herself to relax. It was beautiful here, she reminded herself. Perfect, even. And yet, somewhere beneath that perfection, something unsettled had begun to stir, something she couldn't name. And as Diane's voice carried ahead of her, bright and pleasant, Lauren had no way of knowing that by the end of the day, this immaculate world would reveal its darkest truth. The table beneath the sprawling oak tree looked like something from a lifestyle magazine, a long stretch of polished wood covered in crisp linen, the afternoon light filtering through the leaves above and casting dappled patterns across the dishes. Bowls of fresh salad made from vegetables picked that morning gleamed with olive oil and herbs. A loaf of golden, crusty bread sat beside a block of homemade butter. There were jars of Diane's apple compote and pitchers of cold cider pressed from the orchard just beyond the fence. Everything, every plate, every garnish, had been placed with meticulous care. Lauren sat between Eric and Diane, her hands folded neatly in her lap as she tried to absorb the scene. "It's all so beautiful," she said sincerely, "and delicious. I can't believe you made so much of this yourselves." Diane beamed at the praise. "Oh, we don't rely on stores for things we can produce ourselves," she said. "That's not how Robert and I were raised. Our parents came from nothing. Everything you see here, the house, the land, this table, was built by hard work and discipline." Robert, seated at the head of the table, nodded approvingly. "People these days expect things handed to them," he said, slicing a tomato with deliberate precision. "But we believe in earning what we have. That's how you build character, by keeping things in order and taking responsibility for every detail." Lauren smiled politely and reached for the bread, but something in his words made her stomach tighten. Diane continued, her tone light but deliberate. "And we've taught Eric the same. He's always been focused, never one to drift aimlessly. That's why he's successful. That's why he'll make a good head of a household." She turned to Lauren with a knowing smile. "He'll expect the same from his partner, of course." Lauren swallowed, unsure how to respond. "I think shared values are important," she said cautiously. "Respect, kindness, patience, those matter too." "Oh, of course," Diane said, waving a dismissive hand. "But those are a given. What separates strong families from weak ones is structure, boundaries, understanding one's place." The word place lingered in the air longer than it should have. Lauren reached for her glass of cider, hoping the cool sweetness would wash away the sudden dryness in her throat. Robert gestured toward the rows of vegetables beyond the garden. "See those tomatoes? Not a single one grew by accident. Every plant was pruned, watered, shaped. That's why they're perfect. It's the same with a family. Left untended, it grows wild and useless. Diane laughed softly, as if the metaphor were charming. Lauren forced a smile, but her heart had begun to thud a little harder. She found herself thinking of her mother's words. There's something cold about him, something I can't explain. She glanced at Eric, hoping for a reassuring smile, but he wasn't looking at her. He was watching her, studying her, as if trying to decide whether she belonged here in this world of precision and control. His eyes weren't warm, they were measuring, and the longer they lingered on her, the more exposed she felt. "You've done an incredible job," she said brightly, trying to push the thought aside. "Everything here is so perfect." "Perfection doesn't happen by accident," Robert said. "It takes discipline. It takes knowing when to be firm." He set his fork down, his expression thoughtful. Too much softness in gardens or in families leads to ruin. A breeze rustled the leaves above them, but Lauren felt none of its coolness. The air seemed heavier now, pressing against her skin. Diane poured more cider into her glass, her smile unchanged. "We're proud of what we've built here," she said. "Proud of the values we've passed down. Eric understands the importance of legacy." Eric said nothing. He didn't need to. The silence between them spoke volumes. Lauren tried to steer the conversation toward lighter ground. Her work, the art exhibit she'd helped design, a recent trip to the coast. Diane listened politely, but her responses were clipped, steering the topic back to the house, the land, the Whitman family, and all they had accomplished. Lauren's compliments, sincere though they were, felt inadequate, swallowed by a tide of self-congratulation that seemed to fill every corner of the garden. The longer she sat there, the more she became aware of an undercurrent she hadn't noticed before, a chill beneath the sunny veneer, a faint current of judgment winding its way through every word. It wasn't hostile, not outright, but it was there, a subtle message. This is who we are. Can you be this too? She looked at Eric again. He was still silent, still watching. Not smiling, not reassuring, just evaluating. And in that moment, her mother's warning echoed louder than ever. Robert reached for another slice of bread mid-sentence when something in the distance caught his eye. His hand froze. The conversation faltered. His gaze hardened, shifting toward the far edge of the property. Without a word, he pushed back his chair and stood. "What is it?" Diane asked, her voice still light but with a thread of tension. Robert didn't answer. He stared into the distance for a beat, his jaw tightening. Then, with a muttered "Excuse me," he turned and strode across the lawn, his steps purposeful and quick. Lauren blinked, startled by the sudden shift. "Is everything okay?" she asked. Diane's smile returned instantly, too quickly. "I'm sure it's nothing. Robert just likes to keep an eye on things." Eric said nothing, his gaze following his father's retreating figure. Lauren tried to settle the unease prickling beneath her skin, but the spell of the idyllic afternoon had been broken. Something was happening, something she didn't understand. And as the distant figure of Robert disappeared behind the orchard, a thin thread of dread began to weave itself through the still summer air. A sharp, panicked sound pierced the stillness, thin and high, like a bird caught in a snare. Lauren froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. Diane paused mid-sentence. Even Eric's gaze snapped away from her, following the direction Robert had disappeared moments before. The cry came again, closer this time, and then the sound of shuffling feet and a gruff voice cutting through the quiet afternoon. When Robert returned, he wasn't alone. In one hand, he clutched a branch-like stick, its bark stripped smooth. In the other, he dragged a small boy by the collar of his t-shirt. The child couldn't have been more than 10, his cheeks streaked with dirt and tears, his legs stumbling to keep pace with Robert's long strides. A few pale green pears tumbled from his pockets, and rolled across the grass. "Got you, you little thief!" Robert barked, shaking the boy so hard he yelped. "Thought you could sneak in and take what isn't yours." The boy whimpered, his small hands gripping at Robert's wrist. "I'm sorry, sir. I was just hungry. I only took 2. Lauren's heart lurched. 2 pairs. He was just a child. Diane rose from her seat with an almost theatrical sigh, her expression twisting into something that made Lauren's stomach turn. "These neighborhood kids have no respect anymore," she said coldly. "They grow up thinking they can take whatever they want. Little parasites." "Please," the boy sobbed. "Please let me go." Robert ignored him. "We've had enough of this nonsense," he growled. "How many times do we have to teach them?" Lauren looked to Eric, expecting to see outrage, or at least discomfort. But his face was calm, disturbingly calm. He pushed back his chair and walked toward his father and the trembling boy. "Eric," Lauren said quickly, rising to her feet. "Stop. He's just a kid." Eric didn't stop. He crouched slightly so his face was level with the boy's. His voice was low, deliberate. "If you ever come back here, if you ever cross that fence again, I'll tear your ears off. Do you understand me?" The boy cried harder, nodding frantically, but Eric wasn't finished. He grabbed the boy by the ear, twisting just enough to make him squeal. "Say it," he hissed. "Say you understand." "I understand. I'm sorry." Lauren's breath caught in her throat. She felt the ground tilt beneath her. This wasn't Eric, not the man who brought her flowers on Fridays, who kissed her forehead in the morning. This was someone else entirely, someone capable of cruelty without hesitation. "Eric, stop it!" she shouted, stepping forward. "You're hurting him." Diane turned to her, her smile gone, replaced by a look of frosty condescension. "Lauren, darling, don't involve yourself. This is how children learn. If no one teaches them consequences, they'll grow into criminals." "He's 10. Lauren cried. "He's a child, not a criminal." "Children become criminals," Diane replied smoothly, folding her arms. "And I, for one, would rather stop that before it starts. Robert, maybe we should call the police. Let them make a note. A juvenile record might make him think twice." The boy wailed, dropping to his knees. "No, please. Please don't call them. I didn't mean to." "Get up," Robert snapped, yanking him to his feet. "You trespassed. You stole. That's a crime. And in this country, even a 10-year-old should know better." Lauren stared at them, horrified. "You're going to ruin his life over a few pairs." Robert's gaze cut to her, hard and disdainful. "That few pairs represents our work, our effort, our property. People like him think they're entitled to what we built. We won't tolerate it." Something inside Lauren broke. It wasn't just what they were doing, it was how much they enjoyed it. The righteousness in Robert's voice, the cruel satisfaction on Diane's lips, and Eric, her Eric, watching it all with a detached, almost approving calm. "Look at him," Diane said sharply. "He's not even sorry. If we don't deal with this now, he'll be climbing through windows in 5 years." Lauren shook her head in disbelief. "You're not teaching him a lesson. You're humiliating him. You're scaring him." Robert turned to Eric. "Well, you're the man of this family. Show him what happens when people cross our boundaries." Eric's jaw tightened. He grabbed the boy by the shoulder and jerked him upright. The child cried out, his legs buckling. "You think you can steal from us?" Eric said, his voice rising. "Next time, we'll let the police handle you. They'll be the ones dragging you away." The boy screamed a raw, terrified sound that made Lauren's stomach twist. She stepped between them, her voice shaking. "Stop it, all of you." Silence fell, heavy and sudden. Robert frowned. Diane's lips curled into a patronizing smile. "Lauren," she said coolly, "you don't understand how the world works. People like us, we protect what's ours. We don't let people walk over us. And if that bothers you, Perhaps you're not cut out for this family." Lauren turned to Eric, desperate. "Say something. Please. This isn't right." Their eyes met, and what she saw made her breath catch. It wasn't anger or conflict in his gaze. It was calculation, cruelty, a cold, quiet approval that froze her to her core. It was in that moment that the mask shattered. The warmth, the charm, the steady hands that had held hers. All of it was gone. What remained was something darker, older. A cruelty that didn't start with Eric, but had been nurtured here, in this garden of order and control, passed down like an heirloom. The boy's cries echoed in the heavy air, and Lauren realized she was standing in the middle of a nightmare. This wasn't just about pears or property. This was about power and the people who wielded it without mercy. Her chest tightened, her breath shallow. The perfect garden blurred before her eyes. The perfect family she had admired just hours ago was gone, replaced by something monstrous. And as the boy sobbed at her feet, she understood with horrifying clarity. This was who they were. And this was who Eric truly was. Lauren's pulse hammered in her ears. The boy was still crying, his small body shaking, and no one, not Robert, not Diane, not even Eric, seemed to care. They looked at him like he was less than human, like he was a pest that had wandered into their carefully tended world. Something inside her snapped. "Enough," she whispered, barely recognizing her own voice. Then, louder, stronger, "Enough." The word cut through the hot afternoon air like a bell. Robert turned toward her, his brow furrowed in irritation. Diane arched an eyebrow. Eric blinked, his hand still gripping the boy's shoulder. Lauren stepped forward, every muscle in her body trembling. "Let him go," she said. "Now." Robert scoffed. "This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me when a child is being terrorized in front of me," Lauren shot back. "You've made your point. He's scared. He's crying. And you're still not satisfied. What do you want? To destroy him for taking 2 pieces of fruit?" Eric's voice was low, measured. "He needs to learn that actions have consequences." Lauren turned to him, her chest heaving. "Consequences? You're threatening a 10-year-old like he's a criminal. You're hurting him. You're enjoying it." Diane's smile thinned into something cruel. "If this upsets you, perhaps you're not ready for what it means to be part of this family. We have standards, Lauren. We protect what's ours." Her words ignited something fierce and unwavering in Lauren's chest. The fear that had been knotting itself in her stomach since morning was suddenly burned away by something stronger, clarity. She looked at Eric, at the man she had once imagined building a future with, and saw him as he truly was, a reflection of everything in this garden. Rigid, cold, merciless. Her voice trembled at first, but with every word it grew steadier. "I will never marry you," she said. "Never. I will never let someone like you be the father of my children." The world seemed to freeze. Eric's face went pale, as if the words had struck him physically. Robert's mouth fell open. Diane blinked once, twice, before her expression hardened into disdain. "You're overreacting," Eric said finally, his tone clipped, controlled, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of panic. "You don't mean that." "I do," Lauren said, her voice now unwavering. All of this is monstrous. And if this is the family you come from, if this is who you are, then I want no part of it." Diane let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. "Oh, please. You'll regret this. Women like you always do. You'll come back once you realize what you walked away from." Lauren didn't respond. She couldn't. Every fiber of her being screamed to get out, to run. The boy, still trembling, clutched at the back of her dress. Instinctively, she stepped closer to him, shielding him with her body. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're safe now." For a brief, suspended moment, no one moved. The Whitmans stood like statues in their perfect garden. Eric still and silent. Diane's smile brittle and mocking. Robert fuming just beneath the surface. And then, without another word, Lauren reached for the boy's hand. "Come on," she said softly. Together, they walked across the flawless lawn, the boy stumbling beside her on unsteady legs. She didn't look back. She didn't want to see Eric's face, or the contempt in Diane's eyes, or the fury simmering behind Robert's silence. The pristine garden, once so beautiful, now felt suffocating, a gilded cage she was desperate to leave. When they stepped through the wrought iron gate and out onto the dusty lane beyond, Lauren finally stopped. The boy stood beside her, still crying quietly, his face blotchy and red. She crouched down so that her eyes were level with his. "Hey," she said gently, brushing a tear from his cheek. "Look at me." His wide, frightened eyes met hers. "You have to understand something," she said. "Taking something that isn't yours, that's not right. You can't do that. But what they did in there." Her voice softened even more. "That's worse. Grown-ups are supposed to protect you, not scare you like that. What they did was wrong." The boy sniffled and nodded. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I won't do it again." "I believe you," Lauren said. "Now go home. Be safe." She gave his small hand a reassuring squeeze and then let go. He hesitated for only a moment before darting down the road, his skinny legs carrying him away from the estate as fast as they could. Lauren watched until he vanished from sight. Then she straightened, her heart pounding but strangely steady. A warm breeze stirred the trees overhead, carrying the faint scent of ripening fruit. Just hours earlier, she had walked into this place thinking she was stepping toward her future. Now she knew she had narrowly escaped a disaster. She pulled her phone from her bag and called for a taxi. As she waited, she stared back at the tall iron gates. They stood closed now, silent and imposing, like the walls of a fortress guarding not wealth or legacy, but cruelty. Eric had told her once that he admired strength, that he valued control. Now she understood what that meant. And she understood, too, that she wanted no part of it. The taxi arrived with a soft hiss of brakes on gravel. Lauren climbed inside, giving the driver her address in Hartford. As the car rolled down the quiet suburban road, she watched the Whitman estate recede in the rearview mirror, the manicured hedges, the gleaming house, the illusion of perfection. Her chest still ached from what she had witnessed, and her hands trembled slightly in her lap. But beneath the turmoil, a strange, powerful certainty had taken root. She had walked away, not just from Eric, but from a life that would have trapped her beside people who believed cruelty was strength. For the first time since the morning, Lauren felt like she could breathe. The sky was already beginning to soften into the golden haze of late afternoon by the time Lauren's taxi pulled into her street in West Hartford. She felt hollow, as if the day had drained every ounce of strength from her. The hum of the tires on the pavement, the faint buzz of cicadas outside, everything sounded distant, muted, like she was hearing the world through a layer of glass. When the car stopped in front of the little white house she had grown up in, she sat there for a moment, gripping the door handle and trying to steady her breath. Then she stepped out and walked slowly up the familiar path. Margaret must have heard the taxi, because the front door swung open before Lauren even reached it. One look at her daughter's face, and she didn't say a word. She simply opened her arms. Lauren collapsed into them, and for the first time all day, she let herself cry. "Sweetheart," Margaret whispered, holding her tightly. "What happened?" Lauren tried to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. They sat down together on the old couch in the living room, and slowly, haltingly, the story came out. She told her mother about the beautiful garden, the perfect house, the way everything had seemed so polished and controlled. She spoke of the neighbor turned away like an inconvenience, of Diane's careful smiles that never quite reached her eyes, of Robert's lectures about order and boundaries. And then she told her about the boy. The words came faster then, sharp, trembling, soaked in disbelief and fury. She described the pears spilling onto the grass, the cruel hands grabbing a child who had done nothing more than pick fruit from a tree. She told Margaret about Eric's face, cold, unrecognizable, and the way his voice had sliced through the air as he threatened a terrified 10-year-old. When she finished, Lauren was shaking. "I thought I knew him," she whispered. "I thought he was kind. But there's nothing kind about him, Mom. Nothing." Margaret didn't speak right away. She just held her daughter's hands, her thumbs brushing slow, soothing circles across Lauren's knuckles. "You saw who he really is," she said softly, "and you walked away. That takes strength." "I was so blind," Lauren murmured, wiping at her tears. "You told me something felt wrong, and I didn't listen." Margaret shook her head. "No, sweetheart. You needed to see it for yourself. And when you did, you didn't make excuses. You didn't stay and hope it would change. You chose yourself. I am so proud of you." Lauren's chest tightened at those words, not with pain but with relief. Something heavy inside her shifted and fell away. For the first time since she had stormed out of the Whitman estate, she felt like she could breathe again. Margaret stood and went into the kitchen, returning a few minutes later with 2 steaming mugs of peppermint tea and a plate of warm apple pie. They sat at the old wooden table that had been in their family for decades, the one where birthdays had been celebrated and homework had been done and late-night talks had unfolded. The scent of cinnamon and sugar wrapped around them like a familiar embrace. "This," Margaret said gently, sliding a plate toward her daughter, "is what home should feel like. Safe, kind, human." Lauren nodded, her throat tightening again. "It's the opposite of that place," she said quietly. "Everything there looked perfect, but it was cold, soulless, like nothing mattered but control." "Some people mistake control for strength," Margaret replied. "But strength is choosing kindness even when it's hard. It's seeing someone weaker and protecting them, not crushing them." They sat together long after the tea had cooled, talking in low voices about everything and nothing. Lauren felt the tension slowly drain from her body, replaced by a deep, quiet peace. The day had broken something inside her, but it had also built something new. A sharper instinct, a stronger resolve, a clearer understanding of what love should and shouldn't be. As the sky outside deepened into a dusky violet and the crickets began their evening chorus, Lauren leaned back in her chair and looked around the kitchen. It wasn't grand or immaculate. There were scuffs on the floorboards and a crack in the corner of the window pane. But it was warm. It was real. And it was hers. She didn't know what the future would bring. She didn't know when, or if, she would fall in love again. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The next time she did, it would be with someone whose strength came from compassion, not cruelty. Someone whose heart was warm, not frozen beneath a polished smile. For now, that was enough. And as her mother reached across the table and squeezed her hand, Lauren allowed herself a small, weary smile. The day had begun with dreams of a future built on perfection. It ended with a quiet, steadfast belief in something far better, a future built on kindness.